Good evening, everybody. I'm Ellie Dix from Pivotal Education, and I'm here with Paul Dix.
Hello, good evening, everyone.
Who's going to be your trainer for this evening. Just to say thank you to everybody who submitted questions. We've got lots and lots of questions for this evening's webinar. We've chosen to take ones that are most appropriate for this week's topics. So you may find that your question, if it isn't answered tonight, is answered by future units in the course or is answered in the second webinar. So without any further ado, let's go to number one, question number one. This is from Hannah Jarvis. She says, I've always thought that shouting to get attention is ineffective, even more so after the first week of this course. However, how else can you get the attention of a large group of children who won't stop talking, even when you use names and make eye contact with the majority of them?
Hi Hannah, good question. Kick us off. So, I'm going to use a countdown, but I'm not going to just use a sort of a raw countdown that then negatively reinforces the children who are still talking. So you find a lot of teachers will sort of go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Why are you talking? And actually, it doesn't encourage any of those learners who are quite quick to come to order. It focuses the attention on that 1, 2, 5% of children who are still nattering. So I'm going to give a countdown, but I'm going to embellish it with positive reinforcement. 5, Reese, fantastic. In fact, your group on that bench, brilliant. You're listening to me straight away. Thank you. 4, and Hannah, you've done exactly the same. 3, Nathan, if you could just come back to your bench, brilliant. 2, and if we could move away from that, yes, you know, thank you. 1, Wahid, are we nearly there? 0, if there's anyone still talking when you get to 0, I'd give them a public reminder or a public warning about their behaviour. And I would caveat that with, look, Giles, we're still talking. I've got to 0. This is a warning. When I count down to 0, we all need to be quiet. Thank you. And I'd often explain to the children that the only time I will do a public warning or a public reminder is when I'm speaking to the whole class. I'm going to try and avoid doing any of my behaviour, my negative reinforcement, any of that in public. So I'm going to try and do that in private as much as possible. But it's that 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 countdown, done well. And part of it is your performance. Part of it is you believing that when you get to 0, everyone's going to be quiet. And they can hear it in the tone of your voice. So if you're sort of 5, 4, and it's a bit helpless, and you're thinking they're not going to be quiet, well, they probably won't be. So part of it is performance, part of it's your confidence, but also it's about that positive embellishment that lots of people leave out, and it's so critical. In fact, I was speaking to a teacher last week who had been using the countdown with positive embellishments and said to me, within a week, I had them. I didn't even need to go from 5. I just went from 3. And it's actually that positive bit that makes the big difference. A couple of other ideas for you as well. The first is you could start writing the names on the board in a positive way for the learners who are quiet first. And you can do that very quietly, and it's a very powerful way of just showing them that you appreciate those children. And what you might find is that little ripple effect that goes around the class. Lastly, don't forget music. So many teachers, I was talking to Ollie Frith, our head of training, the other day, and he said that we always use music in pivotal training sessions, and we use music when they come in. I always use music with learners as well when they're coming in. I choose the music to fit the climate. I'm not playing their music, I'm playing the music that I'd like to play. And I was talking to Ollie, and he said to me after a training session, a teacher came up to him and said, I just never thought about using music. It had never crossed my mind. It's just incredible. And Ollie said to her, he said, that's brilliant. What subject do you teach? She said, well, I teach music. So she never kind of thought it was brilliant. So you could have some music on and just fade the music down. When I want a group of adults to come to order, and I realise they're normally better behaved than perhaps your year 9 might be, but that fading down of the music is a kind of a universal cue that we're coming to order and we're listening to the teacher. Clearly, your position at the front of the class, strong physical position is important. If you're trying to call the class to order while you're still busying around setting up the next experiment or investigation, then that's not going to be convincing. So you do have to have that sort of that power stance and at the front of the room where everyone can see you. And I think you need to be focused on the children rather than focused on the next activity. Call them to order, then move on.
That's great, Paul. Thank you. And I'm just going to re-say something I said at the beginning, but it may have got missed off this second video attempt. We're going to try and answer as many of your questions as possible during today's session, but some of them are more appropriate for later on in the course. Some of them will be answered by topics we're covering later in the course. So let's move on to question 2, Paul.
Okay.
Can you share your ideas for how you would stay calm in an overheated classroom? This is from Jan, and by overheated she means that pupils won't settle down and that her own temper is sort of rising steadily.
Okay. Your own emotional control is at the centre of this, and I know that that's come across in this first part of the course. But of course, you know, we have to be not too hard on ourselves. We're not going to get it right all the time. We're aiming for 8 out of 10. But look, you know, simple things around physical control that also help your emotional control. You know, control your breathing, control your movement. Just go to your happy place sometimes. I have a teacher who works in one of the pupil referral units where I'm chair of governors, and he goes to his happy place, and the children watch him and they say, "What are you doing, sir? What are you doing?" He says, "I'm just taking a moment." And his happy place is on the beach with a cocktail in the high summer with the sea lapping, and he can just go to that. That doesn't necessarily help you when there's a lot of chaos going on to control the class, but it does help you to control yourself. And your anxiety, your tension translates to those children so quickly. So I think, you know, we do all the good stuff. We do the meet and greet at the door. We do a lot of pretending. And teachers need to be great actors. Look, most of us, and most of the teachers you see in the school, you know, we started off pretending. Most of us carried on pretending for quite a long time, and we pretend to be calm. None of us are particularly calm. Underneath the surface, we're raging. But great behaviour management is counterintuitive. The urge to go with that emotional response is very strong, but it is your ability just to hold that down, to focus perhaps on the 95% that are doing the right thing, to look into the eyes of the children that are paying attention, who are taking instruction, who are doing exactly what you want. And I find very often that little shift of emphasis and my shift of perspective to the 90%, the 95% who come every day, do the right thing, they're kind, they're engaged, that really helps me to get a perspective on it. Look, teaching's an odd profession. If somebody told you when you started teaching that let's say 90% of the children you come across will be polite, well-mannered, hardworking, diligent, you'd think teaching was the best profession in the world. But we get sucked into focusing on that 5%, that 10%. I'm never suggesting that you ignore those children. Of course that concerns you. But having that focus on the 90% just allows you to reset your own expectations. I've got a great class. 90% are with me. Okay, I've got that, you know, the niggle with that 10%, but I'm going to work through them. And tomorrow's lesson will be better than today's. And my focus on that 90% is going to help me to stay calm throughout. But look, don't beat yourself up when you make a mistake. None of the teachers around you, none of the teachers that in your school, in your academy, in your college are perfect in terms of their emotional control. We all fall off the wagon, and children will accept that. It's 8 out of 10 that you're aiming for.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And Paul, I was just listening to what you were saying about behaviour management being counterintuitive. Isn't that's so interesting, because it sort of reinforces what I know you often talk about, which is why you have to plan for your behaviour management, just like you plan the contents of your lesson, the subject that you're teaching. And I think that because often your intuition will take you down the wrong path and make things worse.
Yeah.
It's a really, really good reason to get that planning in place.
And it's really odd about teaching, and you know, sometimes it's promoted through teacher training that the whole focus is on the content, the knowledge, the structure of the lesson, the differentiation, the additional needs, and the behaviour management doesn't have any time for planning at all. You sort of make it up on the hoof. And to give yourself the confidence in the classroom to enable you to pretend as a new teacher a little bit better, or getting to know a new class a little bit better, you need to be really, really well prepared, because that lack of preparation seeds the anxiety. Look, we've all been at school, and if you go back sort of 20 years and maybe a bit more, the teacher who wheels in the DVD with the television, whose whole lesson is focused on playing this DVD, and they can't get it to work and they don't know what buttons and it's all a panic. The whole class is seeded with that anxiety. Like the teacher who walks in late and flustered and hasn't done their photocopying and hasn't got their class list and where's the electronic register and all of that. Suddenly the class feel that and pick up on it. So you find that these really amazing teachers who don't seem to be fazed by anything, do you know what? They're not necessarily the people who were born with that confidence. They faked it and now they're making it. And I think we all go through that transition, whether it's as a new teacher or, interestingly, whether it's as a teacher moving from one school to another. And I was talking to Tom Bennett the other day about exactly that, moving from one school to another, and how, even he, when he moved from his school to another one, had to start again with the behaviour management. So it's an experience we all have.
Excellent, thank you, Paul. Okay, we're moving on to the next question. This is question 3. It's from Shankari. How do you help or guide children who have a strong belief that this is who I am and it's not going to change? So what do you do with the child who says, I'm always forgetful, nothing's ever going to help me remember, or I'm never going to finish a task on time, it's just not what I do?
It's that little, I call it a negative internal monologue, and it just runs around their head. Now, part of that could be their self-esteem, or whatever you want to call that, their lack of confidence. Part of it also with a new teacher, or if with a new group, might just be a little deflection for you. I can't change. I'm not able to do it. Leave me alone. Move on. Go and hassle somebody else. So I think a few things here. You've got to try and interrupt that negative internal monologue. You're going to constantly challenge it. You're not going to buy into the idea that they can't do it and nothing's going to help me and I'll never finish on time. In fact, you can start to reflect back to them your opinion of them. I mean, in a way, you don't need to challenge their opinion. You just need to give them your opinion and from your perspective. So, you might well think that, but from my perspective, you seem to remember far more than you forget. In fact, last week, you were first with a hand up. In fact, if I look back in your book, there's quite a lot of work here that is absolutely complete and done. And so that evidence to them, rather than just challenging it, actually proving it to them. Last Friday, when I gave you that positive note, you're starting to reframe them. You've spent a little bit of time catching them do the right thing. You can refer back to when they did remember, when they did complete work, and you can start to gently challenge their belief. You might think that, but I believe in you. You might not believe in yourself at the moment, but we do. We all think you're going to be fantastic. So you're almost starting to turn their statements around, their negative statements around, and make them positive. It's hard, and it is a drip, drip, drip. Behavior management isn't about let's pick a few strategies and it's all brilliant tomorrow, or this is all going to work in a week. If you're working in a tough environment, you're working in a challenging school, if you're working surrounded by poverty, surrounded by lack of aspiration, you are going to have to challenge that negative internal monologue, not just for days or weeks. It could well be for months with some learners. And so being realistic about that is important. Otherwise, you feel like you failed after you've been doing it for 30 days. You think, oh, it's not working, I have to try something else. Actually, if you think about it, learners who are under the impression that they're worthless, that they're not able, they've been going through that little monologue for years and years. I mean, they've been batting teachers away who've tried to make them work. They have been batting parents away who talk about the fact that they should be better and they should be getting higher grades. And now they're going to try and bat you away as well. Look, the key here is that you are not going to give up. You are not going to buy into the little narrative that they've made for themselves or that perhaps they've built up over time. And actually, you're just going to challenge it calmly and gently. Clearly, what you can do in a whole class situation might be limited. And this might be a case when you're talking about those learners for a bit of one-to-one, a bit of help from the pastoral team, from a learning mentor, from a really good learning support professional could just help to do some one-to-one work to prove to that child, if they really believe that they're worthless, that actually their work has worth and they themselves have worth as well.
Yeah, interesting. Thanks, Paul. Just while you were speaking there, we've had a question come in from...
supplementary.
Kay Core, yes,
Okay.
Sorry. On the hoof now.
I'm on the hoof.
Yes. This person wants to know, okay, if you're praising children, giving your first attention to children who are doing the right thing, what do you do with those children who are not listening to you, even praising the others, and they're not changing their behaviour, they're just intent on getting attention for poor choices?
Okay, we're going to deal with that. That is going to be part of the next bit of the course you're going to do. I'm going to talk to you about scripting your interventions. I'm going to talk to you about stepping the consequences. And clearly for children who are not following the rules or are not being engaged by your positive reinforcement, there needs to be a line drawn. You know, that this is a positive behaviour, but it's not cups of tea and sympathy. There's a hard line here, and there are hard lines of consequences. That doesn't mean that the consequences themselves are huge, because we don't believe that lumping huge detentions, for instance, on children actually changes it. But there need to be those moments, and I'm going to show you how to do that. I'm going to show you how to structure that little ladder of consequences, how to step through them calmly, how to resist the urge from jumping from 1 to 5 in an instant because the child has really annoyed you. And we're going to look at exactly how to do that and get the outcomes that you need as a teacher and that the learner needs. So we're going to look at how to do that without inflaming it, without it blowing up, and without the child sort of throwing their toys out the pram and bolting for the door. And
with also, presumably, Paul, without giving them attention, you know, in a sort of big forum, because that's clearly what a lot of people are aiming for. So, you know, you make sure, don't you, that they don't get the attention in that way, that's personal and private.
Do you know, I some people, I'm quite harsh about this, and you know, some people find it difficult to do at first, but the truth is that the children who crave most attention are addicted to attention. And in so many different ways, not just in your classroom or in your laboratory, but in across the school, they are given fame, importance, and a sense of belonging by being the naughtiest child or the most difficult child. And what behaviour systems have done in the last 20, 30 years is sort of dangle carrots in front of children who are particularly difficult, with the idea that if they see a glistening carrot, they'll suddenly dash off in a positive direction. No evidence for that whatsoever. In fact, most of the children we're dealing with, they'll eat the carrot and then go back onto the negative path, and they're quite used to doing that. So look, part of what we do and part of what I'm going to introduce you to in this course, of course, you know, the course is not, you know, there's more to this than just in the course. But what we're going to do with those children is we are going to starve them of negative attention. During the first 2 weeks of that, that's going to be difficult. They're not going to like it. They're going to kick off. It's going to be awkward. It's going to be difficult. You're going to get to a point where you think this isn't working. And you'll have to go through the eye of a pretty difficult storm to get out the other side, where the child actually realizes that the door to attention for negative behavior is closed. We're going to do that through private sanctions. We're going to do that through restorative interventions. We're going to do that through consistent scripts. And then we're going to open another door that says this is the route to get positive attention, the route that 95% of the children in this class use, which is doing the right thing, doing their work on time, following instructions, following the rules or the routines that you've got in your classroom or in your lab. But it is, again, it's a slow process to do that. What we can't do is continue trying to bribe children or offer them big rewards for doing the right thing. You know, that what those children do is they're badly behaved for 4 days. They're brilliantly behaved for a day. They get all the points, all the merits, all the rewards. And everyone says they've been brilliant because they've behaved on 1 day. When you know, and I know, that there are children in your class that behave brilliantly every single day and don't seem to get their recognition. Whereas these children who just behave for an afternoon or a lesson suddenly get every reward. So we are going to approach that in a very different way. And the schools in the Pivotal Network who have got that find that 5% suddenly reduces considerably. And as everyone else starts moving in one direction, they are forced to follow, not because there's a big stick waiting to beat them, but because that route of fame and celebrity and here's my red report card and I report to the boss and I spend every lunchtime sitting on the chair outside the head's office. All that fame, all that celebrity is just taken away from them. Think about it. The easiest way to become a celebrity, to get well known, to have your name on the lips of every teacher, is to be appallingly behaved. And don't think those children haven't worked that out already. What we need to do is to show them that that door is firmly closed and there is only one route in your class, in your school, to get the positive recognition, to get to the good path. There is only one route to that.
Excellent. Thanks, Paul. That's really brilliant, and well done on the hoof there.
Yeah,
very, very good on the hoof. Now, question 4 comes from Sophia. She asks,
are we only on question 4?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah,
crikey. Okay, let's crack on.
Speed up, haven't we? She asks, if one teacher learns how to manage a difficult cohort, does that mean that class or group will become easier for all the other teachers as well?
Oh, I wish it was that easy. That would be fantastic, wouldn't it? Then we could just allow some super teacher to sort of sort them out, and then everyone else would be all right. The trouble is, those teachers, the kind ones will allow you to share in their success. The slightly meaner ones will sit in the staff room and say things like, well, he doesn't do that for me, and you don't learn much at all. Look, it doesn't mean just because they behave well in one class, they're going to behave for you. They're responding to the climate of the school, of course they are, to the culture, the values of the school they're in, but more immediately they're responding to you, to your personality, the way you teach, the way you manage behaviour. But of course there are some ways to capitalise on the work of others. And so let me just give you a couple of those. The first one of those is, have you been into that teacher's classroom? Just popped in to look at what's going on. Have you invested a little bit of time? I know it's difficult, but just to invest a little bit of time, spending some time in that classroom, almost connecting yourself with that teacher, being in that positive atmosphere and letting the children know that that's the way you want to work as well. Have you looked at the routines that are going on in that classroom? Have you looked at the behaviour management structures that are going on in that classroom? And can you replicate some of that? I have the experience a lot of times where I'm starting to teach the children a routine, and the children will say, "Oh, we do that in humanities," and then I suddenly think, "Well, why? This is ridiculous. I'm trying to reteach them something they already know. Why don't I just go to the humanities department and ask them to borrow their structure so I can replicate it in my room because they already know the routine?" So you can certainly replicate, you can certainly borrow, but don't expect to just because you borrow a routine or you replicate some ideas around rules and behaviour management that suddenly everything's going to be all right. The last thing is, the teacher that you visited, the super class, amazing behaviour, get them to visit you as well, so that the children get to know that there's a little triangle between them and you and this other teacher. If they're all right with that teacher and you're all right with that teacher, then it makes sense that they would be all right with you. And that little triangulation is an accelerated way to build a bit of capital early on, particularly moving a job or being a new teacher or taking on a new group.
Yeah, that's great, Paul. And I mean, isn't it true that it's just mainly about relationships? So, the relationship that you have with your class is obviously different from the relationship that class has with another teacher. Sometimes it's hard to deconstruct what teachers that have got really good relationships with their learners are actually doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Being built up over such a long amount of time. Absolutely.
I remember sitting with a student teacher, watching an expert in behaviour management, working with a year 11 group, and we walked out and the teacher said, "Well, that was no good, was it?" I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Well, I didn't see any chairs thrown, I didn't see any arguments, they were calm and well behaved." And what we'd been watching is a teacher who'd been working for 30 years, who had their routines absolutely ingrained. When she walked over to there, that group knew they'd follow her. When she tapped on the table, that she knew the group should listen to her. And the student teacher who was watching couldn't see that. So we went back in and watched another lesson. And I just pointed out the little things that she was doing that are so subtle. So look, you might have some brilliant teachers in your school, but that doesn't mean they can teach you everything they know about behaviour management. They may not know how they got there themselves because it's just become what they do and who they are. So I think that's that's an important part of. I've slightly lost the thread of your...
Yeah, sorry, it's about relationships and
I was going to say...
other people's...
Okay, and the other thing I was going to say is that relationships is a really heavy word, isn't it? If you, you're a science teacher, you're teaching 8 different groups, 10 different groups over the course of a week, you see them once or twice. Some of the year 7 groups you might see on a rotation every 8 weeks, and people are talking to you about relationships. Now, relationship can make people think, well, how am I going to get a relationship with 30 children? Do you know what? They don't really... The relationship thing is a bit of a heavy word for what we're talking about. What we really, really want, and what they really want, is a bit of botheredness. And that botheredness can come from that meet and greet at the door and shaking their hand and asking them about the weekend. They don't want the big relationship, friendship. In your career, you will probably identify, a handful of children who had a really, a deep effect on. The others, you want them to walk away knowing that you cared. But that's not about grandstanding and saying, I need personal mentoring 30 children. It's not about that. It's just about those small acts of daily botheredness. Remembering who they are, remembering what they're interested in, remembering what makes them tick, remembering the special dates for them. Small stuff really, really matters. So I know that when I talk about relationships, some people go, I haven't got time for that. No, I don't suppose you have got time to have that kind of in-depth relationship, professional relationship with that many learners. It's about your botheredness. That's the key.
That's great. I really like that, acts of botheredness and making sure you know what's going on in their lives, just key information. That's really useful. I think that's something that's quite achievable actually for teachers.
But it's got to be, hasn't it? Yeah. I mean, all of this, it cannot rip your time away from teaching. We talk a lot about behaviour management, but and I know the best schools talk more about learning than they ever do about behaviour. So I think that, that knowing that you can get that stuff done but yet still focus on your teaching is really critical. Because if we start giving you strategies that take up teaching time, well, that only has a limited lifespan.
Brilliant. Okay, Paul, question 5.
Okay.
How should I manage students who frequently speak over me and their peers in lessons? This is from James.
Okay, James, good question. Right, let's deal with it in 2 parts. So the first is in the moment, and the second is what you do afterwards. And perhaps what you do afterwards is more important. Look, in the moment, if people are talking over you, you need to stop. You need to stop. I would stop. I would maybe even just take a little step back, and I would let them finish. And then I would make it really clear that you talked over me. Again, not in an accusatory way, but just really identifying the behaviour that they've done. Weirdly, in behaviour management, telling children the behaviour they're doing in the moment can often be more powerful than accusing them or judging them or delivering a sanction. The example of the student who's standing on the table. 99% of people see a student standing on a table, they say, get down off the table. And the kid goes, no, I ain't getting down. Saying to the child, you are standing on a table in my classroom, can be so much more effective. They sort of check themselves. Yeah, I am. And you see them sort of climbing down. What they wanted was the confrontation. They don't get it. They just get that sort of raw, I can see what you're doing. So I think part of it is around stop in the moment. You might decide, and I think you ought to, if it's the first time it's ever happened, but it's happening repeatedly, then you need to go down your sanction steps. It's a reminder. It's a warning. The next time you do it, it's a minute after class. And make sure that you are drawing that line and drawing that boundary. Clearly, we need to be talking about a child who's not got an additional need. If you're talking about children who have autism, who have Asperger's and ADHD, we make allowances for a bit of talking over. We make allowances for the fact that their social skills might not be quite as advanced as some of your other learners, or at least they're slightly skewed and different. But I think if it's just a little bit of rudeness and a little bit of a lack of thought, it is about focusing and refocusing on the one voice rule. So very often I say, we talk to teachers about one rule in the classroom, one routine, single focus. Shoot one rabbit, you try and shoot 2, you probably miss them both. So we just focus maybe for the next 2 weeks, the next 30 days on the one voice rule. Introduce it. Put it up in the classroom, in the lab, put it up on 3 parts, laminate it to the desk if you want, one voice. and really focus, model it with them, show them you're listening to them. When I speak, you listen. When you speak, I listen. And what you're probably dealing with is a bit of a lack of social skills or a little lack of boundaries. It sounds to me like it's quite simple, just to tighten that up a little bit. So the one voice rule, I would pursue that one voice rule from the door. So I'd be standing at the door saying to the children as they walk in, one voice today. We okay? You all right, Robert? One voice. Yeah. And not just mine, could be yours, but there's only going to be one voice at a time. So set the rule as you walk through. As soon as you introduce the lesson, when there are children quiet and listening to you, thank them for it. Thank you. There's one voice in this room and it's mine because I'm needing to give you instructions now. When I ask you a question in a moment, we're going to use a raise of the hand, or we're going to use our mini whiteboards, and we're going to have one voice in the same way. So you're modeling it, you're chasing those children who are doing it rather than constantly chasing the children who are not doing it, using them as a model. That was really lovely there, because I know you wanted to ask me another question, but you waited and you let me finish. Thank you so much. That's great. And really establishing that that's what you want allows those other children to go, okay, that's what he wants. Very often, teachers know what they want. It's in our heads. But we don't take the opportunity to really explain that to the children before the start of the lesson, or at the start, or at the beginning of a routine. We rely almost on children guessing how Mr. Dix wants us to behave, because it's different to how Miss Wood wants us, or how somebody else wants us. And I think part of working with a new group or tightening behavioural expectations is about really explaining what you want. So interestingly, what we're tempted to think is if you concentrate on the one voice rule, all the other rules go out the window. But fascinating, if you concentrate on one thing and you really focus on it, you find that lots of other things start to slot into place. It's those teachers who try and change everything at once that find themselves in chaos. It's the teachers that are quite, they deal with behaviour in small bits and in narrow bands. They get the behaviour they want. I'm going to bang on about one voice until we've got one voice. In fact, until the children say to me, sir, please, okay, we get the one voice thing. We understand. Great. Well, I'll move on and I'll raise the expectation a little bit more.
That's really useful. And we're going to be looking at those routines in more detail later in the course.
Yeah.
I think when you were saying that, it reminded me that when I was teaching, I taught students who were, that shouting or talking over, it was normal for them. That's how they get attention in their own house. You think it's all really weird. You can't understand why they shout. And then when you meet the parents or you visit the home,
they shout at you.
Everyone's shouting all the time.
It's like living in Italy.
And then you suddenly think, oh, it's not that he's being rude. It's that that's what they do.
Absolutely. And I had the same thing of a child who just had no volume control at all.
Yeah.
Until you realise that he lived in a house with 8 other people, and the only way to get noticed for anything was to shout. So the whole volume was. So again, it's about those. What's the behaviour I really want in my classroom, in my lab? What is the behaviour I want in my faculty? And instead of waiting for those children to bring that behaviour to me, I'm going to hang a sign, almost metaphorically, above my door saying, "This is how we do it here. One voice." Multiple voices and lots of volume might work in your home. That's okay for you out there. But when you walk through the door of this school, of this faculty, of this lab, this is how we do it here. And I think that is a really, for me, it just reminds me that the children coming to me haven't had the same experiences of me. They haven't had the same childhood as me. They haven't had the same upbringing. I don't live in their houses. I don't necessarily live in their community. I'm dealing with multiple behaviours, some of which work very well outside the school, but are extremely destructive for learning once the children are inside the school. So that's really clear. I'm sure if those teachers that are working in a school that really does that at the front door, they have their head teachers at the gate, don't they? They have their senior staff setting the standard even as the children are walking in. And that mantra is coming out of their mouths as well. This is what we expect when you walk through here. This is the uniform. This is you need your planner. You need your equipment. These are basic minimums for working in this school. And
it's really about not just expecting that because they've been in education for the last 10 years, of course they must know what's expected of them now. Because it's really about setting setting your individual expectations and avoiding words that could be loaded or subjective, isn't it? And it's really clear, observable behaviours.
And it's so frustrating, isn't it? I mean, you're working with a Year 11 group, and they have been in education for a long time. They clearly ought to know how to behave in that situation, but they're kind of testing you because you're a different adult. And again, we go back to that question, does someone else's great behaviour management transfer to my classroom? No, very rarely does that happen. And they're just, they're having to go through that same thing again. I mean, it's interesting that, when we talk about teenagers particularly, they are like toddlers. Their whole brain is sort of rewiring. They're challenging stuff they didn't challenge before. They've got different approaches. They've almost forgotten all of the learning in terms of behaviour that they did before 13, or seemingly so. As soon as they hit 13, there's a whole new set of behaviours that emerge. They're almost having to be retaught. And I find it quite useful when I look at teenagers to think, you're like a toddler whose brain is rewiring. And I, that so that I don't take that challenge personally, and I don't see it as any sort of personal attack on me.
Great, thank you. Right, we're going to move on to the next question. Now, The next question is really two questions, right, but I felt that they were quite similar, so we could deal with them both together.
Okay.
So the first question's from Manjula. She says, I'm supporting a new teacher who's teaching maths to a very tricky group who've got no interest in the subject. Okay. How can I help her to start to get control of this very difficult group? The second question is similar. I teach maths, to a class of noisy girls who have very little interest in the subject. They hardly ever stop talking. What strategies can I use? And that's from Jenny.
Okay, Jenny and Manjula, a great question. We should really turn the camera onto Ellie, being a maths specialist. I'm sure she could help you as well with this. Look, meet and greet at the door. Show your enthusiasm for maths, even when they reject it, even when they think you're odd and a bit strange and a bit weird. Your idiosyncrasy, your passion for your subject will shine through. The next thing is try and engage them not just with textbooks and worksheets, engage them with investigations. Look, if you think about trying to bring maths to life a bit, I'm not trying to be cheesy. I'm just... the textbook and the way that a lot of textbooks are set out kill any sort of problem solving or any sort of investigation. If you look at a math textbook, it almost seems like they've given you all the bits of the answer before you started. And what problem is worth solving when you've been given all the answers in advance? In fact, you lose that bit of investigation. So of course there's process stuff you need to teach them, but I think you might be able to engage them a little bit more through the investigative work so that they can work on the process themselves, they can work on that problem-solving aspect, and they can start to have their work coming out of the textbook and into a bit of real life. You're not going to be able to do that all the time. You're not going to be able to do that every lesson. But you might be able to show them that maths is a bit wider than just that process-led bit, and you might be able to excite them a little bit with the investigation. And you know what? Annoy them with your enthusiasm and passion for the subject, because despite their protestations, they may not hate maths as much as you think. They may just be being a bit lazy, and they might have got away with their last maths teacher doing very little work by saying, I'm not very good at maths, I'm bored with this. You need to have a fresh start with that. Ellie is a maths specialist. Am I?
Well, yeah, I agree.
Near the mark.
I was just thinking also that maths is one of those subjects. It's very rare that it's one of those things that lots of people feel comfortable to say, "Oh, I'm rubbish at maths." Lots of adults say, "I'm rubbish at maths." So these students might be getting messages from home about their parents not being very confident with maths, not understanding maths, hating it at school. And if they're also hearing messages like, "You're just like me, you are," then, that's going to set them in motion for not understanding. And maths is one of those things that if they don't understand, they find it difficult to progress with. So giving them as much opportunity as possible to do exploration and rather than prescriptive set tasks that have to have the next step in is really useful as a sort of planning strategy.
So not being very good at maths is not genetic. Just because my parents say they weren't very good at maths doesn't mean that somehow I've inherited the bad at maths gene. And I think you might want to there might be an interesting challenge to that idea that actually being good at maths might just be about being good at a lot of things, which is practice and engaging with the work and having a great teacher whose passion overrides your teenage cynicism.
Absolutely, and we've just had a nice comment coming from Rochelle, who's watching the webinar, saying that her maths teacher used to do Star Wars impressions and say cheesy jokes to encourage them to do their work, and it worked.
People follow people.
Yeah.
You know, go to any school at options evening, year 9. What are the kids choosing? Are they choosing subjects because they want to have a career in that area? Probably not. Are they choosing subjects because they have a dying passion for the subject? No, they're choosing subjects because they like the teachers, because the teacher engaged them in with silly songs and odd things, and people like teachers who are a bit weird and and a bit idiosyncratic and a bit maverick. What we're trying to do here with the behaviour management course is give you a really firm base of consistent behaviour practice, but on top of that you build your own personality, your own character, your own style, your own little weird things that you do in lessons, the stuff that the kids go, oh, you're mad, that's insane, you're really weird, but they absolutely love it. And so sometimes when you can't engage them with the content, you might be in a maths department where you've got a very prescriptive textbooks. You might have to try and engage them, as Rochelle says, on a more personal level. But again, that's that botheredness. It's the drip. It's not the big, drama. It's what you do every day that makes the difference.
Great. Okay, I just want to pick up on something that Adrian's been talking about since a comment you made previously about doing. This is when you were talking about Keystone habits, something, focusing on doing one thing. Yeah. And then if you focus on that, that has a ripple effect on other things. Adrian's training to be a teacher at the moment. I think either ITT or may possibly an NQT.
Okay, hi Adrian.
And I think he's in training, and he's finding that when he focuses on one thing, he's dropping balls in other areas, and that because he's being observed a lot, he's constantly getting new feedback, and you must do this, you must do that. Yeah. How can he manage all of those different balls? I mean, this is a massive question, obviously.
Yeah. Well, but I think the in terms of the behaviour management, the single focus, I think you're always going to get peppered with questions from observers around teaching and learning and your differentiation and your whole class versus group versus direct instruction and all of that. I think you can make a case actually in terms of behaviour management that this is what we're focused on here. I'm going to focus on this for the next week, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, because actually I want to get that right. And I think, there's an urgency in teaching, isn't there, that doesn't often allow people to get really good at something before they move on. So I think part of it, people who observe you will always find bits to tell you about. You couldn't see a teacher without picking up on something. I think you need to have the determination to say, look, in terms of behaviour, if I don't get this right first, for instance, if I cannot call the class to order at the beginning of the lesson effectively, there's very little point me starting to engage in higher level behaviour strategies because they're not listening to me. So I think any observer will understand that you're having to learn, that they might well listen quite hard to that idea of, no, I'm going to pursue this routine. I'm going to pursue my meet and greet at the door. I'm going to pursue my use of scripts until I get it right, until I'm comfortable with it. And one of the problems with initial teacher training is, and it didn't used to be like this, that there's almost an expectation that by the end of your training period, you need to be outstanding. That's a very, very odd thing in training. You become a great teacher. Let's avoid the outstanding word because it's so loaded. You become a great teacher over years. You don't become a great teacher through a training course. You can become a good teacher working to be great, but it's rather like passing a driving test and thinking that you're Ayrton Senna and can start, and suddenly have all those skills. None of us do. And I think. In fact, if you look on Twitter at the moment, there's a lot of blogs being written about, do you know what, I want to be a good teacher. And these are very experienced teachers saying that label outstanding is not actually doing me any good. What children need is a succession of good teachers, not some teachers who are branded great or outstanding and some teachers that are branded failures. What they need is that sustainable good teaching And you know, we can all put on a show lesson, we can all do something incredible over an hour or two, but doing that every day is the key to it.
Yeah, brilliant. And Adrian's just said that he's encouraged to hear all that.
Good, Adrian. I hope you're at a good.
He's an NQT.
I hope you're enjoying your NQT year, and I hope that you don't feel that pressure to be at the top of your game by the end of it. You know, I really like to see newly qualified teachers who say, you know, I'm okay, but I've got a lot to learn, and I know that now I'm in school, I'm going to learn so much so quickly.
Brilliant. Okay, Paul, next question.
Okay.
We've got time for another couple, I think.
Okay.
What's the best way to settle a class down after an incident has occurred during break? This is a classic, isn't it, from Sharon?
Okay, so decisions to make, Sharon. It's difficult to give sort of a blanket one for that because I don't know the learners and I don't know their problems. So let me give you a couple of options. First of all, be at the door and deal with the problems at the door. Don't let them come into the lesson. So if you've got a couple of learners who arrive agitated, angry, clearly there's been some incident you don't know about, but there's clearly been something going on either in the last lesson or at break time, stand them aside at the door, get the rest of the class in, and on, maybe just stand with your foot in the door and take a moment and get those children just to breathe, to calm down. Now you have a decision to make. With younger children, I very often say to them, look, I can see there's been a problem at break time today, and I really would like you to talk to me about it. I am going to be here at the end of the lesson or at lunchtime or at break time, and I'd like you to stay behind at the end so that we can talk about what's happened, because clearly it's pretty important to you. So if I make you that promise that I will give you my time at the end of the lesson, can we put that aside now? And can we think about how we're going to enter this lesson? Now, what that does is it allows the children to know that you're listening, that you're not going to ignore it, that you're not just going to wash over it. It gives them an opportunity and a space to talk to you on their own, but very few of them ever take it, because most of the time, these little break time bust-ups, by the time you get to the end of the lesson, they say, oh, I don't need to talk to you about it now, sir, and they're off. So minor incidents can be dealt with like that. Clearly, when you've got them stood at the door, I like to have before I let them in the room, I always say to them, okay, I'm gonna let you in the room now. What's the first thing you're going to do when you walk into the room? And also I might be saying to them, how will I know you've left the incident behind? So in 5 minutes, when I look over to you, how will I know you've left all that behind? Oh, well, sir, I'll be working, I'll be in my group. And so you just let them visualize how they are now going to behave. Otherwise, they will slip back into that argument. If you think there's been a particularly nasty incident, or if you know your learners well enough and you look them in the eye and think, okay, if I let them in here, it's not going to go well, and actually I don't think they're going to be able to delay the conversation with me, then you might decide to get them to write it down. But I would get them in the room, I'd get them separated, I wouldn't make a fuss about it with the rest of the group. I'd give them a piece of paper and I'd say, you've got 3 minutes to write down what happened so that you've given your account to me. I'm then going to take the papers off you, I'm going to put them in my desk, I'm not looking at them till the end of the lesson. So at least then they feel like they've said what they needed to say, that you've got a record of it, and in that way you might find that they can compartmentalize that and get on with the lesson. You know, none of this is straight lines. It's about knowing your learners, it's about being able to read them, but it's also about meeting those problems at the door, because you know and I know that once they're in, and if you allow that problem to come into the room, it starts to taint the lesson and it could wreck your lesson. Just that incident suddenly bubbles up in the middle and the whole thing's gone. So it's important at the door, set the boundaries and give them a route to being able to explain that to you. That doesn't mean you've got to stand at the door for 10 minutes while they argue with each other and then you try and sort it out, and the 29 children in the room saying, hold on, we turned up on time, we're here, we're well mannered, we're polite, we're ready to go, and you're standing at the door talking to those two. So it's part of it is about how you deal with the incident, part of it is about how you send the message to the rest of the children about how you will deal with every incident, whether it's those two learners or whether it's next week it's them.
Thank you, Paul. That's really useful. I think that's really answered the question well. So this next question is about how you make your own behaviour management consistent, even if you feel that it's very affected by your mood. So Caroline wants to know, how do you make behaviour management more consistent, even when you feel different kinds of moods? And I think it's interesting because there's been quite a lot of discussion within the webinar this evening
Yeah.
about how much a smile changes everything, how you feel and how people behave.
Okay, so we talked a bit about meet and greet. I keep talking about meet and greet, not just because it works effectively on the learners, but for exactly that, Ellie, that the more I smile, the more my own, the washing machine breaking down, the traffic being bad, the problems, all of that, I can put it behind me because I'm standing at the door and I'm smiling and I'm we're back to pretending again, aren't we? We're not all smiley on a Monday morning or even on a Friday morning. We don't wake up smiley, but actually part of that pretending and part of that positive reaction to the learners coming is critical. But there's more. You need to spend your energy on the learners who deserve it. You don't need to waste your energy on the children who are trying to affect your mood. So that little shift. Consistency, 3 rules in your classroom and only 3. So it's clear. Look, every school in the state of California uses the same 3 rules. Ready, respectful, responsible. Simple, done. And actually then you can be more consistent because you can peg your interventions on those 3 things instead of pegging them on 1,000 different rules. So real clarity about the rules in your classroom is really critical. The scripts and the routines that we're doing later in the course are really going to help that, because instead of the class running on your mood, the class is going to run on routine. What we want to do is get to a stage where the children walk in smiling, they know what to do, they know the routine for group work, they know the routine for silent work, they know, and you don't have to use your mood to try and manage that. That takes a bit of time, but that discipline in yourself in going back to the routines is going to be really helpful. It sort of depersonalizes it, and you start talking about the routine rather than about me and you. I think one of the things that really affects mood are those secondary behaviors, those behaviors that children do that they do subsequently. So for instance, you ask a child to move from one bench to another. They huff and puff and they drag their stool across to the other bench. And all you want to do, every part of your body wants to scream at them, don't scrape the stool on the floor. Don't, you're suddenly want to chase those secondary behaviours. Don't do it. Don't do it. One, it plays into their narrative of I can control my teacher. Secondly, it's totally exhausting because children are engaged in secondary behaviours all the time. And thirdly, it allows them the idea that they can distract you from the primary behaviour, which was moving, by a bit of secondary behaviour, cause a kerfuffle, and out they go. So, it's important that you have structure, your 3 rules, your routines, your scripts. When we get to stepping children through the sanction steps, that's important as well, because you're going to be giving them take-up time, and you're going to be moving in with dignity and moving out with dignity. But look, again, we're back to that. Don't beat yourself up when you fall off the wagon. And you know what? One of the most powerful things you can do when you lose it a little bit with a class, when your mood is not good and you react badly, is weirdly to apologise to the class the next time you see them. There is nothing more powerful than saying to a group on a Monday morning, look, I know Friday was bad. I've done some thinking about it. I'm really sorry about the way I reacted to you. And so I've drawn up this little routine that's going to help us through this week. I'm going to make sure that we pursue this routine, but I'm not going to do it by shouting, and I'm not going to do it with anger. And so, there's a way to get back on the horse once you've fallen off. None of that is easy. None of that is simple. But I think having tight rules, tight routines allows that consistency to come through. And when you hear the scripts and the micro scripts, you'll see how you can be consistent with even the most challenging children in the most difficult situations by not improvising with them.
Yeah, absolutely. You need to try and reduce that improvisation,
it's
don't
exhausting.
you? And that's, we're talking about planning for behaviour. We've spoken about that several times. That one of the main reasons for doing that is that you don't have to improvise, because improvising is where you're most likely to revert to some ridiculous version of a teacher that you used to have when you were young.
Well, that's so true, isn't it, Ellie? What we don't realise when we start teaching is that all our defaults have been set by the teachers who taught us. So you find yourself getting frustrated, your mood being poor, and suddenly you're saying ridiculous things to the children that your teacher said to you 20 years ago. Why am I waiting for you? Would you do that at home? And you're thinking, I didn't even learn these phrases. your teachers set your defaults, which is why it's so critical that you don't improvise and that we actually put a script in place so that you've got a plan of what to say even when you're dealing with a highly stressful situation.
Right, okay, Paul, I'm going to cram one last question.
Oh, okay,
in.
blimey, that went fast, didn't it? Okay.
Yeah, we're on 2 minutes left, so
Crikey,
you're
I
going to
think
have
it's
to
the
try
coffee.
and answer
Okay,
this
good.
really big question in a short amount of time.
Big question, short amount of time. Go.
The question is from Anna. She says, I think I have too much empathy for students who display challenging behaviour and I'm being too lenient with them. SLT are critical of my distract and re-engage process. How do I become tougher?
How do you become tougher? Wow. You don't really want to become tougher, do you? You just want to appear to be tougher so that you get the SLT off your back. I get that, okay? I'm going to guess what they're probably meaning by the tougher bit is that you're not imposing sanctions on children quick enough. You're not drawing that line fast enough, and you're allowing some of those behaviours just to trickle on because you know that learner's struggling a bit and you know that they've probably got a reason or two at home why they would be a bit drifty. So I think you can be strict without being nasty. You can hold your line with children and still have empathy with them. And I think it's difficult for me because I'm trying to project myself into your classroom and into the SLT who are looking at you. But very often it's about when you see that behaviour, give the warning, give the reminder, give the 5 minutes at break time. Don't hang back too much. Otherwise, the children will know that actually she just kind of gives us warnings and never follows through with it. And then the low-level disruption just rumbles and rumbles and rumbles. You have to draw a line with it. Look, empathy is good, but too much empathy with children that means they're getting away with not doing the learning actually means they're going to walk away from your class with poor progress or poor exam results. That's doing them no favours whatsoever. You know what the best teachers do? They separate the two things. They say, this is learning time and we're going to learn in here. And if you need to speak to me, if there's a pastoral issue, there's people in the school you could talk to. There's support I can give you, but this is learning time. And I think that separation might help you a little bit to not to be more strict, but just to draw that boundary a little bit earlier than you might have done before. Not to be harsh with the children, but just to keep making the point, this is learning time. And in that way, you can probably maintain your empathy with them, but pursue the learning with a bit more vigour.
That's excellent. Thanks so much, Paul.
Thank you very much, everyone, on the webinar. Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.
Don't forget, we're doing another webinar in another couple of weeks. And please do attend that and give us all of the rest of the questions that have popped up from tonight's webinar.
And look, the best of luck. And remember, this is a drip feed. Take these strategies, take the philosophy and start working it in day by day. If it doesn't work after a day, a week, don't panic. Keep going. Some children, some classes need to go through and know you're serious before they start to change their behaviour. You change yours for a couple of weeks, it might take a couple of weeks longer for the children to start changing theirs.
Excellent. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.